In 1971, your grandfather could walk into his backyard, butcher a hog, smoke the meat in a barrel he built himself, and sell the sausage to his neighbor without a single form, a single license, or a single government agent knocking on his door. By 1980, that same act could land him a federal fine. Today, it could shut down his property. Number 14 on this list was practiced by every rural family in America for over 200 years. The FDA reclassified it overnight. Number 6 was so effective that pharmaceutical companies lobbied to have it removed from public knowledge entirely. These 20 skills were not dangerous, they were competition. Hit that subscribe button. Let us count down the 20 grandfather skills the FDA quietly made illegal. Before 1967, a man could raise a pig in his backyard, slaughter it on a cool November morning, and sell cuts to anyone in the county. Millions of families did exactly this. Your grandfather would stun the hog, scald and scrape the hide, gut it clean, and hang the carcasses in the barn overnight to cool. He had been doing it since he was 12, taught by his father, who was taught by his father before him. The meat was fresh, and the buyer watched it happen. There was no mystery about what was in that pork chop. Then the Federal Meat Inspection Act expanded in 1967. Suddenly, any meat sold to another person had to be processed in a USDA-inspected facility. Building one cost tens of thousands of dollars. Permits took months, and inspectors had to be present during every kill. The skill did not change. The law did. Families who had fed their communities for generations were pushed out overnight, not because the meat was unsafe, because compliance was unaffordable. The industrial packing plants that could afford inspectors kept operating. The grandfather with a clean barn and a sharp knife did not. Whole communities that had depended on local butchering for generations watched that tradition disappear within a decade. The meat in the supermarket came wrapped in plastic from a plant 3 states away. Nobody knew whose hands touched it. Nobody could watch it happen, but it was legal. Number 19, raw milk sales. Your grandfather milked the cow at dawn, strained the milk through cheesecloth, and had it on the breakfast table before the children were dressed for school. Neighbors would come by with glass jars and buy a gallon for 25 cents. The milk was whole, unpasteurized, and full of enzymes and bacteria that modern science is only now beginning to understand. In 1987, the Food and Drug Administration issued a federal ban on interstate sale of raw milk. Many states went further and banned all retail sales entirely. The official reason was pathogen risk. And yes, contaminated milk can make people sick, but your grandfather's operation was one cow, one family, a clean barn, and a customer who could see the entire process. The industrial dairies that actually had contamination problems at scale kept selling pasteurized milk in plastic jugs. The man with a single Jersey cow and a spotless milking parlor became the criminal. Today, in roughly half the states, buying milk directly from a farmer remains illegal or heavily restricted. The skill of keeping a family milk cow and sharing the surplus with neighbors has been regulated into near extinction. Number 18, home-rendered lard. Every fall, when the hog was butchered, your grandmother took the leaf fat from around the kidneys and rendered it in a cast-iron pot on the wood stove. She cut the fat into small pieces, cooked it low and slow for hours until the cracklings floated to the top and the liquid below turned clear as water. Strained through muslin into ceramic crocks, that lard kept for months without refrigeration. It made the flakiest pie crusts, the crispiest fried chicken, and the most tender biscuits the American kitchen has ever produced. But by the late 1970s, the USDA dietary guidelines had declared war on saturated fat. Lard was painted as a killer. Crisco, a hydrogenated vegetable shortening manufactured in a factory, was promoted as the healthy alternative. School home economics classes stopped teaching rendering. Cookbooks dropped lard from their ingredient lists. The skill of turning a whole animal's fat into a year's worth of cooking fuel disappeared in a single generation. The science has since reversed. We now know that the trans fats in hydrogenated vegetable oils were far more dangerous than the natural lard they replaced. Your grandmother's ceramic crock was healthier than the Crisco can that replaced it, but the skill is gone, and the companies that killed it are still selling shortening. Number 17. Home canning without USDA approval. Your grandmother canned everything: tomatoes, green beans, peaches, corn relish, apple butter, and pickled beets. The pantry shelves bowed under the weight of mason jars filled during August and September. She used a water bath for high-acid foods and a pressure canner for low-acid ones. She learned the technique from her mother, who learned it from her mother, going back to the mid-1800s. For most of American history, this was simply how families preserved food. Then the regulations started layering on. The FDA tightened rules around selling home canned goods at farmers markets. State health departments required commercial kitchen licenses for anyone selling preserved food. The USDA published strict processing guidelines and warned that any deviation could cause botulism. The fear campaign worked. A generation of Americans became convinced that canning was dangerous without official instruction, expensive equipment, and approved recipes. Your grandmother canned safely for 50 years with a pressure canner she bought for $4 in 1948. She did not need a government pamphlet to tell her that green beans needed pressure canning while pickles did not. She knew because she had been taught. That chain of knowledge has been largely broken. The mason jars are still on the shelf. The confidence to fill them is not. Number 16. Sassafras tea. For centuries, sassafras root bark tea was one of the most common home remedies and everyday beverages in rural America. Your grandfather would dig sassafras roots in the spring, scrub them clean, shave off the reddish bark, and boil it into a fragrant tea that tasted like root beer, because root beer was originally made from sassafras. Families drank it as a spring tonic, believing it purified the blood after a long winter. In 1960, the FDA banned safrole, the primary compound in sassafras oil, as a food additive, after studies showed it caused liver cancer in laboratory rats. The doses given to those rats were astronomically higher than anything a human would consume drinking tea. But the ban stood. Commercial root beer switched to artificial flavoring. The sassafras trees kept growing in every forest from Virginia to Texas, but the knowledge of how to use them began to fade. Your grandfather's spring ritual of digging roots and brewing tea became, technically, a violation of federal food additive regulations. A tree that had nourished indigenous peoples and settlers for hundreds of years was reclassified as a threat. You can still find sassafras growing wild along every dirt road in the rural South. The roots still smell the same. The knowledge of what to do with them is what disappeared. Number 15. Selling home smoked meat. Your grandfather built his smokehouse from scrap lumber and a dirt floor. He hung salted pork shoulders from hooks in the rafters and burned hickory or applewood in a pit below. The smoke rose slow and steady for days, sometimes weeks, curing the meat into country hams and bacon that would last through the winter without refrigeration. Neighbors bought them. Country stores carried them. Whole communities depended on a handful of men who knew how to smoke meat properly. The USDA gradually made this impossible. Facilities needed concrete floors, stainless steel surfaces, approved ventilation, temperature monitoring equipment, and regular inspections. A man whose smokehouse had produced safe, flavorful meat for 40 years could not meet the new codes without spending more than the meat was worth. The large commercial smokehouses that used liquid smoke flavoring and industrial ovens had no trouble complying. The skill your grandfather spent a lifetime perfecting, the slow patience of real smoke over real wood, became a regulatory casualty. Today, a country ham smoked in a wooden shed by a man who learned from his father is one of the rarest foods in America. First pattern break. Here is what nobody tells you about these regulations. They were not all written at the same time, and they were not all written for the same reason. Some came from genuine public health concerns. Contaminated milk did kill children in the early 1900s. improperly canned food did cause botulism. But by the time your grandfather was practicing these skills, the knowledge of how to do them safely had been refined over generations. The regulations that followed did not distinguish between a factory processing 10,000 pounds of meat a day and a man processing 1 hog a year for his neighbors. The compliance costs were the same, the paperwork was the same, the inspections were the same, and the result was the same every time. The big operations kept running, the small ones closed. Your grandfather did not lose these skills because they were dangerous. He lost them because the system was not built to accommodate a man who did things right on a small scale. For over 200 years, rural American families grew comfrey in their gardens and used the leaves to make poultices and salves for sprains, bruises, broken bones, and skin irritation. The plant nickname was knitbone because people believed it helped fractures heal faster. Your grandfather would crush fresh comfrey leaves, mix them with lard or beeswax, and apply the paste to a swollen ankle or a deep bruise. Modern studies have confirmed that allantoin, a compound in comfrey, does promote cell proliferation and reduce inflammation. But in 2001, the Food and Drug Administration issued a warning against comfrey supplements for internal use because the plant contains pyrrolizidine alkaloids that can damage the liver when consumed in large quantities over long periods. The ruling targeted supplements sold in capsule form for oral consumption, but the fear spread to every use. Garden centers stopped labeling comfrey as medicinal. Herbal remedy books added warnings. A plant that had been in continuous external use for centuries was suddenly treated as if rubbing it on a bruise was the same as swallowing concentrated extract by the handful. Your grandfather never ate comfrey pills. He put a leaf on a swollen joint. The distinction was lost in the regulatory language. Number 13, selling farm eggs without a license. Your grandmother kept a flock of 15 hens in the backyard. They scratched through the garden, ate kitchen scraps and bugs, and produced about a dozen eggs a day during peak season, more than the family needed. So she sold the extras. Neighbors stopped by with empty cartons. The general store kept a few dozen on the counter. No forms, no inspections, no egg grading certificates. Today, depending on the state, selling eggs from your own hens can require a license. An egg candling operation, refrigeration within a specific number of hours of collection, and labels listing the farm name and address. Some states require the eggs to be washed in water at a specific temperature. Others mandate cold chain storage that mirrors commercial operations. The eggs themselves have not changed. A hen is still a hen. An egg is still an egg. But the permission to sell what your hen produced has become a regulatory obstacle course that discourages most small flock owners from even trying. A grandmother with 15 chickens and a handwritten honor box on the fence post has been replaced by a factory with 1 million birds in cages and a compliance department. Number 12, home butchering wild game for community sharing. When your grandfather shot a deer in November, he did not just feed his family, he fed the neighborhood. He would hang the deer in the barn, skin it, butcher it on a table he had built for exactly this purpose, and distribute wrapped cuts to widows, elderly neighbors, and anyone who was having a hard year. This was how rural communities operated. The meat was shared freely, not sold, but the skill of properly breaking down a whole animal was the engine that made the generosity possible. State game regulations eventually complicated this. Tagging requirements, processing rules, and donation protocols created paperwork around what used to be a man walking a paper-wrapped roast across the road to a neighbor in need. Some states now require donated wild game to pass through a licensed processor. The intention may be food safety. The effect is that a grandfather who could break down a deer in his barn in 90 minutes now has to drive 40 miles to a processing plant and pay someone else to do what he already knows how to do. The skill is not gone, but the freedom to use it generously has been quietly restricted. a man who once fed his community with nothing but a rifle and a sharp knife, now needs to navigate a system designed for commercial meat packers. The deer are still in the woods. The neighbors still need the help. The red tape stands between them. Number 11. Wood ash lye soap making. Your grandmother made soap from 2 ingredients: rendered animal fat and lye water made by filtering rainwater through hardwood ashes collected from the fireplace. She would leach the ashes in a barrel, collect the brown alkaline liquid, heat it with tallow or lard, and stir it until the mixture thickened and saponified. Poured into wooden molds, it set into a hard, pale soap that cleaned everything from skin to laundry to kitchen floors. This required no store-bought chemical, no factory, no supply chain, just fire, fat, rain, and knowledge. The Food and Drug Administration's regulation of soap is actually minimal if the product makes no cosmetic or medicinal claims, but labeling requirements, safety data sheets, and consumer product regulations have made selling homemade soap a bureaucratic challenge. More importantly, the knowledge itself has atrophied. When your grandmother stopped making soap because store-bought ivory was cheaper and easier, the next generation never learned. The skill that once made every homestead self-sufficient in its most basic hygiene product vanished not from a single ban, but from the slow suffocation of regulatory complexity and commercial convenience working together. Number 10. Herbal tinctures and home remedies. Your grandfather kept a shelf in the cellar lined with dark glass bottles: elderberry tincture for colds, willow bark tea for headaches, mullein leaf steeped in olive oil for earaches, plantain poultice for bee stings. These were not folk superstitions. Many of them contained the same active compounds that pharmaceutical companies later isolated, patented, and sold back to us at 1,000% markup. Aspirin is derived from salicin, found in willow bark. Your grandfather chewed the bark. The Food and Drug Administration's regulation of dietary supplements under the 1994 Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, combined with aggressive enforcement against health claims on herbal products, created an environment where sharing traditional remedy knowledge became legally risky for anyone selling products. A grandmother selling elderberry syrup at a farmer's market who said it helped with colds could be accused of making an unapproved drug claim. The remedies were not banned outright, but the freedom to make them, share them, and talk openly about what they did was squeezed until most people simply stopped. Your grandfather's dark glass bottles gathered dust. His grandchildren buy ibuprofen from the same companies that studied the plants those bottles once held. Second pattern break. Here is the pattern you should be seeing by now. These skills were not eliminated by a single dramatic law. They were suffocated slowly. A regulation here, a labeling requirement there, an inspection mandate, a compliance cost, a warning label, a liability concern, each one small enough to seem reasonable on its own. But stacked together over decades, they built a wall between ordinary Americans and the self-sufficient knowledge their grandparents took for granted. The food industry did not have to ban your grandfather's skills. It just had to make them inconvenient enough that most people gave up, and then it sold you replacements. Number 9. Backyard poultry slaughter. Your grandfather raised broilers in a chicken tractor on the lawn, fed them kitchen scraps and cracked corn. When they reached weight, he dispatched them with a hatchet on a stump, scalded them in a pot of hot water, and plucked them clean by hand. The whole process took about 10 minutes per bird. The chickens were fresh. You saw what they ate. You knew how they lived. Today, selling a chicken you raised and slaughtered yourself is restricted in most states, unless you process fewer than a specific number per year and meet exemption criteria. USDA small producer exemptions do exist, but navigating them requires understanding federal and state regulations that were written for industrial operations. Your grandfather processed 20 birds on a Saturday morning and had them in his neighbor's freezer by lunch. The modern small farmer fills out paperwork for weeks to earn the right to do the same thing. Number 8. Unlicensed small batch sausage making. Your grandfather ground pork, mixed it with sage, salt, red pepper flakes, and a pinch of brown sugar, stuffed it into natural casings he cleaned himself, and hung the links in the smokehouse. He made 200 pounds of sausage every November. Neighbors placed orders weeks in advance. That sausage, made from a single hog he raised himself with ingredients he could name on one hand, was arguably the safest processed meat in the county. But under current USDA regulations, selling sausage requires a licensed and inspected processing facility. The equipment requirements alone can cost more than the entire annual output of a small farm operation. The grandfather who made sausage with a hand grinder and a kitchen table was regulated out of the market. The factory that makes sausage with mechanically separated meat and a list of additives you need a chemistry degree to pronounce is fully compliant. Number 7, using blood meal and bone meal from home butchering as fertilizer. When your grandfather butchered a hog or a steer, nothing was wasted. The blood was caught in buckets and dried into blood meal. The bones were burned or ground into bone meal. Both went directly onto the garden as fertilizer. Blood meal is one of the highest nitrogen amendments available. Bone meal is rich in phosphorus and calcium. The garden produced better harvests because the animal fed it. This closed-loop system, animal feeds family, animal waste feeds soil, soil feeds family, was the foundation of small-scale agriculture for centuries. Environmental regulations, concerns about bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and fertilizer labeling requirements have complicated the home processing and use of animal byproducts. You can still buy commercial blood meal at the garden center for $12 a bag, but the skill of making your own from your own animals has been abandoned. The circle your grandfather maintained between barn and garden has been broken, replaced by bags shipped from rendering plants 5 states away. Number 6, colloidal silver and home remedy production. Your grandfather's generation used colloidal silver as an antiseptic long before modern antibiotics were widely available. Farm families would apply it to cuts, burns, and infections. Silver's antimicrobial properties are well documented. Modern hospitals use silver-infused wound dressings that can cost $50 each. In 1999, the Food and Drug Administration issued a final rule declaring that colloidal silver products were not generally recognized as safe and effective and could not be marketed with therapeutic claims. The ruling effectively made it illegal to sell colloidal silver as a medicine. The reasoning had merit. People were drinking large quantities of poorly made silver solutions and developing argyria, a permanent bluish discoloration of the skin. But the ruling did not distinguish between a man using a small amount topically on a wound and a company selling bottles of silver water as a cancer cure. The broad stroke of the regulation eliminated the nuanced traditional use along with the fraudulent commercial one. Meanwhile, the same silver compound your grandfather applied with a cloth is now sold back to hospitals embedded in premium wound care products at an enormous markup. Number 5. Open vat cheese making for community sale. Your grandfather could take raw milk, add rennet and cultures, press the curds, and age a wheel of cheese in his cellar. Neighbors bought it. The general store carried it. Communities in Vermont, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania were built on exactly this kind of small-scale artisan production. The FDA pasteurization requirements for commercially sold cheese mandate that any cheese made from raw milk must be aged a minimum of 60 days before sale. This rule eliminated entire categories of fresh, soft, raw milk cheeses from the legal marketplace. Industrial cheese operations that pasteurize milk and produce processed American cheese at scale had no trouble complying. The farmer making a raw milk cheddar in his cellar, the way his father taught him, found himself on the wrong side of a regulation designed for factories. Some artisan cheesemakers have fought back and carved out legal space, but the casual community cheesemaker, the grandfather who pressed a wheel and shared it with friends, has largely disappeared. The cellar where the cheese aged now stores Christmas decorations. The knowledge of cultures, rennet, and pressing times went with the man who kept it. Your grandfather knew every edible plant within 5 miles of his house. He picked wild ramps in April, morel mushrooms in May, elderberries in August, and black walnuts in October. He sold some at the road stand. He traded some with neighbors. This was not a hobby, it was a food system. Foraging on public land is now regulated or prohibited in many jurisdictions. Selling foraged foods at markets requires meeting the same food safety standards as commercially grown produce in many states. Liability concerns have made many farmers' markets reluctant to accept foraged goods. The skill itself has faded because the economic incentive to maintain it has been regulated away. A man who could identify 200 edible wild plants was a community asset. When selling what he found became a legal liability, the next generation never learned those 200 names. Number 3. Farmstead slaughter and custom-exempt processing. Before the expansion of federal meat inspection, a farmer could slaughter an animal, butcher it, and sell the cuts directly to a customer who had purchased a share of the animal while it was still alive. This arrangement, sometimes called custom-exempt processing, allowed communities to access locally raised meat without routing it through industrial processing facilities hundreds of miles away. The regulations around custom-exempt processing have become so complex and vary so dramatically from state to state that many small farmers have simply stopped offering it. The skill of breaking down a whole steer into primals, subprimals, and retail cuts, a process your grandfather could perform in an afternoon, now requires a licensed facility, approved equipment, and a compliance framework that assumes industrial scale. The farmer who raises 6 steers a year on grass pasture and who wants to sell quarters to families in his town faces the same regulatory burden as the feedlot processing 10,000 head. One of them can absorb that cost, the other cannot. Third pattern break. Here is the question nobody in Washington is asking. What happens to a country when 3 generations lose the ability to feed themselves without a corporation standing between them and their food? Your grandfather could raise an animal, slaughter it, preserve the meat, render the fat, make soap from the tallow, fertilize his garden with the bones, and sell the surplus to his neighbor. That single chain of knowledge made him independent. Every regulation that chipped away at one link in that chain made him more dependent on a system that profits from his dependence. This was not a conspiracy. It did not require one. It only required indifference to the difference between a factory and a family. Number 2, home distillation. Your grandfather's father made corn whiskey, not as a criminal enterprise, but as a farm product. Surplus corn was more profitable as liquor than as grain. A bushel of corn that sold for 50 cents at the elevator was worth $4 as whiskey. The still was as common on a farm as the plow. Home distillation was federally prohibited during Prohibition in 1920, and it never came back. Even after Prohibition ended in 1933, distilling without a federal permit remained illegal, and it still is. You can brew beer at home, you can make wine at home, but the moment you apply heat to fermented liquid and collect the vapor, you are committing a federal offense. The skill of building and operating a still, of understanding fermentation and distillation, of turning grain into spirit, was passed from father to son for 2 centuries in Appalachia and across rural America. The law froze that transmission in place. Your grandfather might have known how to do it. He probably did not teach his children. The knowledge that survived did so underground, whispered rather than demonstrated. A skill that was once as ordinary as baking bread became a felony. Number 1, complete homestead self-sufficiency. This is not a single skill. It is the sum of every entry on this list. Your grandfather could grow food, raise animals, slaughter and preserve meat, render fat, make soap, brew remedies, smoke and cure, can and pickle, forage, ferment, distill, and share every bit of it with his community without asking permission from a single agency. That total package of knowledge, that ability to sustain a family from the ground up without dependence on any outside system, was the most powerful skill set an ordinary American could possess. and it has been disassembled piece by piece over 50 years. Not by one law, not by one agency, by hundreds of small rules, each one reasonable on its own, that together made self-sufficiency so legally complicated and financially burdensome that most families simply stopped trying. The grocery store was easier, the factory meat was cheaper, the regulations were too confusing, and so we handed our independence to corporations and called it progress. Here is my challenge. Learn one of these skills this week. Just one. Render lard, can tomatoes, make soap, grow comfrey, sell a dozen eggs to your neighbor, and do not apologize for it. Then come back and tell me which one you chose. I want to know if raw milk gets more attention than smoking meat. I want to know if anyone's grandfather still has a sausage recipe written on a scrap of paper in a kitchen drawer. Because these skills were not banned because they were dangerous. They were abandoned because we were told we did not need them anymore. Your grandfather knew better. Now you do too.